The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
On today's Farm Connections, we focus on clean water and clean air. First, we take you to an innovative environmental project in which the land itself cleans farm drainage water. Then we visit with Minnesota's state climatologist to better understand how weather patterns affect agriculture. We also visit our next FFA Student Leader of the Week, coming up on Farm Connections.
Farm Connections on KSMQ, sponsored in part by the Cedars of Austin, a senior living community. We even have a retired farmers club. Independent, assisted, and memory care apartments. Learn more at cedarsofaustin.com. Will Mahler, the ag attorney, has been representing dairy farms in Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin for 37 years. Will Mahler, the ag attorney's office is in Rochester, and Will is a proud partner of Farm Connections. Thanks, Will Mahler.
We're all connected to our water supply in one way or another. So how we manage this resource affects not only us, but all those who live downstream. A group of farmers, researchers, and other partners recently initiated a project in Mower County which farm drainage water is filtered by natural methods. It involves a restored wetland and an underground biofilter. I visited the project site where I met Rich Biskey from the Nature Conservancy. He gave me the background on this project and explained why it is so important.
It's important for us to manage water where it is. It doesn't matter where you live. The water that falls on your property or with your small area goes somewhere, and it has an impact somewhere else. This project came about as an interest in how we can hold water on the landscape, kind of reduce flooding, reduce stream bank erosion in the Root River watershed. Why the Root River watershed? It's important for biodiversity. It has warm water streams and cold water streams. It's a beautiful scenic watershed, but also important for a diversity of fish and mussels and birds that live within it. And we need to hold water up here so it isn't causing a problem downstream with bank erosion and habitat degradation. The Nature Conservancy is a private, nonprofit organization, and we have chapters throughout the United States, and we have chapters in 30 countries across the world. We're a science-driven organization, and we're non-confrontational. Our goal is to be pragmatic about how we go about our work, and so we work with a lot of state, federal, local agencies, but a lot with private landowners, because what we want to do is have functioning landscapes for people and for nature.
Rich, you're talking a little bit about this waterway that looks like something's changed or it's altered. What did you do here?
Well, what we did is we worked with the landowners and the renter to construct a wetland. And we constructed the wetland in an area that used to be an old oxbow. This ditch that you see here was a stream. And when it was a stream, it meandered about, and then it was channelized to facilitate more drainage. But what it left behind was this old oxbow that was filled with gravel and willow that you'd see along a stream, and it wasn't being cropped. And you know, one of the things that we wanted to do is find a place to put a wetland back on the landscape, but do it so we weren't going to impact the agricultural operations around it. So we can treat the water coming off of there, but we're not going to reduce any cropland area, and we're not going to reduce the productivity and the drainage that's out here. And so we use that envelope, if you will, of that old oxbow, and we excavated it in a way that it has an undulating bottom, so it provides good habitat for shorebirds, amphibians, and then we seeded it down with some wetland plants, and actually a lot of the wetland plants came back in the bottom of the pond, and then we seeded down the buffer area.
When you're describing the bottom of the pond, you mean the elevation heights?
Yeah, and so it kind of goes up and down on the bottom. and you can see some of that variation in the vegetation. So you get a variety of vegetation and a variety of water depths within the pond.
Different species like different parts of the pond?
That's right, both different plant species, but also different birds and the amphibians that use it. So when we drop this down and there's hardly any water in here, you'll see some shorebirds using it, and then we can raise the water elevation and you'll see some ducks and some geese in here.
So you've got this space that was unproductive, couldn't be used for cropland, really wasn't that great for wildlife.
Right.
You enhanced its value.
Yeah, exactly. And so we were able to get a good habitat project, but also a really good water quality project, because we're able to hold water back, but also in holding the water back, providing some vegetation in here, treat some of the water, reduce some of the nutrients coming out of this area.
Well, I was here when you had the open house and you had many people in the area come by, including county commissioners. What's been the response when people see it?
Well, I think initially people were pretty skeptical. Anytime you're holding water back and you're intercepting some of these tile lines, people think, how's this going to work? You're not supposed to do that, and you're asking for trouble. Well, we need to remember, though, that it's a pretty resilient landscape. We can, with a little bit of help, a little bit of nudging, we can bring it back in pretty quick order.
Well, and that's obvious. It's only not even one growing season, just a few months, how it's restored itself.
It really did pop back, and some of those seeds were already here. They just needed a little water, get their feet wet to come back. But really to come through here and see the shorebirds in the spring and to hear the geese cackling, it's a pretty neat place now. It's a win for the agricultural community, but it's also a win for the river and the water resources in this watershed.
Rich gave me the background on this project, but to get a better understanding of how it works, I visited Cody Fox of the Mower County Soil and Water Conservation District. Cody, how does this structure work?
Well, this structure, it actually starts up well beyond this constructed wetland that you're looking at right now. Basically, there's watersheds throughout the country, and it's basically where water flows. It all goes to one central point and gets conveyed on. It goes from stream to river, to lake, or to ocean. Basically, small water sources end up leading to large ones. So water starts up at the top of the hill, up there towards the trees and the windmills, and eventually kind of percolates through the soil. And there's a lot of agricultural drainage tile within this watershed, and it all kind of conveys to a central spot, which we call a tile main. And the tile main actually eventually runs down and into this pond. And our whole intention with this project is to push that water into this pond and kind of let it settle out, let the nutrients settle out, let the sediment settle out before it's distributed right into the nearby creek.
Tell me about the bioreactor.
The wood chip bioreactor is actually quite a complicated process, and it takes good understanding to do this. So I'm going to try to explain it as simply as I can. That tile main I was referring to roughly encompasses 200 to 300 acres of drained area for agricultural drainage. It's directed into the main, and actually what we do is we force it out into basically some wood chips, a long trench of wood chips that is buried underneath the soil. The water slowly moves through that, and there's actually organisms in the wood chips that eat the nutrients and some of the oxygen as well. It's better to keep it in one spot versus in our water, and that's kind of our idea, is improve water quality. That's one of the pieces of this project.
Well, Rich talked about the bottom of the pond and the differences and the new wildlife that came in, and right in front of us is a 12-inch tile line.
Correct.
What's that there for?
This tile line right here is actually an outlet for the pond. Obviously, we don't want the pond to go over the top of the embankment. If it would do that, it would probably wipe out the bank. So really what we do is we have a structure right here in front of us, and this actually is kind of the controller of how high we want this pond. We're able to actually physically manipulate how high this pond is. So let's say if right now the water is 5 feet high and we're expecting a large rain. Well, our idea is to keep some storage in here and treat the water. Maybe we can just open this up and actually pull the gates, what we call as water gates like this, and we simply set these down, and we're actually able to hook it with basically just kind of a pulling latch, and it'll pull it up, and we can basically set the water in this structure will tell this pond how high to stay.
Let's look inside.
All right, let's look inside here. Simply remove the cap. And then here's our, basically it's kind of like a ladder with some pieces on it that we're actually able to pull these logs that we had right here. We're able just to hook onto these and pull them up.
Cody, you showed us the retaining walls, you've showed us the control structure that keeps the pond height. What is this?
This rock is basically what we call an emergency spillway, where the water will go if that structure is unable to take all the water from the pond and from the main tile that is getting dumped into the pond. So for instance, this water structure gets clogged or anything like that happens, or it's just too much water for it to handle, we've got one set channel right here with the rocks to go through. Soil is kind of a valuable resource, as well as we want to keep it where it's at. The rock is kind of extra weight and added protection to keeping this soil in this particular spot where it's at instead of in the creek. We don't want to cut a big hole through here and let the whole pond drain, so we put a bunch of rock here and we refer to it as an emergency spillway, where the water in severe events can go through and enter the creek without disturbing the soil and the landscape too much.
And notice how clear the water is. It's got to be gratifying for you and your staff when you come out to these projects and see them working well. What goes through your mind when you drive out here and take a look at it?
Well, really, I love this project, and all my coworkers will say the same thing. This project really, not always do the projects fit together as well as this one did, but this one just worked out great. You know, I think it was a lot of thought and a lot of time coming about with this project, with the emergency spillway and how everything was set up at certain elevations. There was a lot of thought put into it, and with all the, you see the clean water and stuff, that's really a testament to what has been done here and all the thought that's been put into it with this project.
Now we move from water to air. Last time I was at the University of Minnesota's St. Paul campus, I had the opportunity to visit with Dr. Mark Seeley, a professor in the Department of Soil, Water, and Climate, and Minnesota State climatologist. He shared with me the latest research on climate and how it affects today's agriculture, as well as just about every other area of our lives. Let's listen in. Mark, how long have you worked with the Extension Service?
I came in 1978, Dan, moved up here from the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. They had created my position. That wasn't a vacancy at the time, it was a newly created position following the 1976 drought in Minnesota, which was rather devastating to the state agricultural economy.
Well, you took us out and showed us all the playthings, the instruments, and the expensive equipment. What causes one to want to play with all these things and learn about weather?
Well, I think because the weather and the climate relates to almost every aspect of our lives, and certainly it's very important relative to the Minnesota agriculture. It's been a player in agricultural production ever since we started growing crops or raising livestock, because it really has a direct impact on the quality and the quantity of what's produced.
Can you track the weather patterns and overlay it with economic trends and come to some conclusion about what weather impacts us?
Oh yes, in fact that's routinely done by both economists and climatologists every year. We try to keep abreast of how the weather is affecting the agricultural situation on a weekly basis. We help the state produce the weekly agricultural weather, what's called the weekly weather and crop report, the crop growth stages, the conditions of the crop, the moisture adequacy in the soil, whether or not there's any pest threats, disease threats, or things like that. So on a weekly basis, we're kind of taking the pulse by dovetailing the climate data, the measurements of the environment, with the condition of the crop that's reported from field scouts and field observers.
Well, as we walked around the equipment, you showed us many expensive pieces. How is that information transmitted or taken and recorded?
Well, with modern technology, we take the data and display the data, show the data in both tabular and graphical form online. There's many websites where users can go see what's been happening, what happened this morning versus the afternoon and things like that. We compile the data, we quality control the data, we work on a daily basis with the National Weather Service to make sure the data flow into the State Climate Office is maintained. And then we can do all kinds of things with it in terms of assessments. Who had the heaviest rain? Where did hail occur? Was it of a damaging size? What are the winds doing? There's all kinds of applications to the steady flow of climate data coming into the system.
You were measuring plant water usage through transpiration.
That's
right.
right.
Do plant breeders and other researchers use that data?
Yes, in fact, in the breeding industry in the last several decades, there's been a lot of genetic manipulation of the crop base to try to find material that tolerates drought or tolerates gaps in rainfall, because the majority of our crops are raised under rain-fed conditions, not irrigation. Irrigation is kind of a small fraction in terms of the total landscape. So if you're going to rely on rain-fed conditions, you know you're going to have dry spells where the crop's just going to have to endure and sustain itself on what's in the soil root zone. And so knowing the gene manipulation that you need to do to get crops to better tolerate that and trying to build that into the different varieties, that a lot of that work's been done in recent decades.
So you've been a part of this huge trend that we've seen with extra and increased yields.
Yes, I think the other factor where climate data has driven certainly crop husbandry, not crop genetics, is in terms of the management of the soil. We have used the climate data to effectively evaluate where tile drainage systems are going to work the best, given the soil conditions, given the climate conditions, so we can make a good assessment of where is tile drainage going to be best suited in the state of Minnesota, and what spacing and what level of effective discharge of the surplus has to be accomplished so that farmers can use those soils more effectively.
You mentioned farmers, and that's a huge industry in itself, but Minnesota's home to a lot of agribusiness, some small, some big. How does weather and your data impact the agribusinesses in Minnesota?
Well, I think we're able to do, for example, this year, we're able to do with the carryover drought from 2011, which is really rather serious. We had 33 counties in Minnesota that were in severe drought as we came into this spring. And assessing that and its impact on potential crop production is important, because there are under some cases where of extreme situation where producers are going to want to order, for example, seed of a different variety. Or maybe they're going to want to contemplate, should they be switching their rotation around, or things of that nature. There are some years where that's useful, and that decision is allowed by assessing the climate data and where the climate is now and where it might go during the coming growing season. So all of those are factored into making very important decisions on the farm relative to crop production.
And I'm thinking that data could be used risk management wise for actuaries that look at crop insurance, insurance claims and that sort of thing?
Exactly. Those data are used for all kinds of risk management, be it crop insurance or looking at flood mitigation work, because many of our watersheds in our lifetime, for example, have been manipulated intentionally to be able to handle some of the big flood events so that they don't spread and cover the landscape and inundate cities and businesses and things like that. So yes, the risk management sector uses the data, I would say, very routinely.
Dr. Seeley, how does the weather affect transportation and the ability of barges and trains to deliver products?
Well, routinely, weather doesn't necessarily come into play with respect to the flow of barge traffic. Although there are the occasional years where low flows, we say we're in a drought situation, and low flows on the upper Mississippi are going to affect barge traffic. But that's rare. I would say there have been years, 76 and 88 come to mind. 1976, 1988 were years where a low volume of flow on the upper Mississippi probably had a fairly significant effect on barge traffic. As far as the train traffic across our area, I think it's rare, it's extremely rare. That's probably more likely affected when we have severe winter storms and things like that in the winter season. As far as during the growing season, I don't think we have very many events, unless of course we have flash flood situations which can affect our roads, highways, railroads and everything. And really that's one of the signs, Dan, in our lifetime that we're paying careful attention to, because I think there's widespread agreement in the climate community that we're seeing more intense thunderstorms in our lifetime that are leading to more frequency of flash floods.
When you speak of floods, you must certainly have some data that supports we've had some record events in the past 10 years. What was the largest amount of rainfall inside of a 24-hour period of time?
The largest amount of rainfall we've had out of a flash flood scenario was August 19 and 20 of 2007 in southeastern Minnesota, notably affecting an area from roughly Albert Lee east over to Winona and up towards Red Wing and Lake City. Within that geographic area, we had 6, 8, 10 inches of rain, and down in Houston County, we had over 15 inches of rain from one thunderstorm. And that caused great distress and loss of infrastructure, roads, railroads, farm fields, watersheds were washed out, fisheries, all kinds of things were either totally destroyed or damaged by that storm. That storm, by the way, in 2007 was the third 1,000-year rainfall event of the past decade. Now, how can I say that? Well, our old calculations of what a 1,000-year rainfall event are precisely that. They're old. They're using the old statistics of how often you get certain intense rainfalls. Now we're actually reworking the statistics in recent years to try to come up with, okay, so what is the expectation for a 1,000-year rainfall? Because it's changing. We're getting more intense thunderstorm rains more frequently across not only Minnesota, but the western Great Lakes in general.
Can you think of anybody that's not affected by weather?
I really can't. I think it touches everybody in some way, and it's important in some way. And that's our Minnesota culture, is a great appreciation for the weather and what it can do to us. And of course, we pride ourselves on our resilience in this state. I think that's a common attribute we all have.
Wonderful. Can our farm audience help you in any way, collecting data to help them?
Well, they could actually add to it if they want to. We have a statewide network called the Collaborative Cooperative Observer Network that is managed by our state climatology office. And if people Google on state climatology office, they can find access to that and how to sign up to become a volunteer observer if that's what they'd like to do. And we can always use more volunteer observers because we have such diverse and wide-ranging variation in our weather in the state of Minnesota. We always benefit from having more volunteer observers.
Wonderful. Thank you for having the conversation with us and helping us understand your job and weather.
Thanks for inviting me, Dan.
Now it's time to meet this week's FFA Student Leader of the Week.
Hi, I'm Garret Thompson. I'm the 2012-2013 Hayfield FFA Secretary. I record the chapter's minutes at meetings. I write all the thank you letters. I take care of all the written stuff that the chapter needs filled out. When you're an FFA member, you're showing that you're learning leadership and that you want to help and that you are willing to do these things to help out people and do what you need to do. It's just so important to me because I meet so many people and I get to do the things that I enjoy with agriculture, like showing animals at fairs and I get to do a bunch of those kinds of things. And I've just been involved with agriculture since my dad started introducing me to it. We raise some sheep, and I have steers, and I show. Yeah, it's a really good life. It's nice knowing that when you're tired at night, that you actually have a reason to be tired, that you've worked, and that's why you're tired.
Thanks for joining me on Farm Connections. I hope you gained a greater appreciation of the elements that make farming possible. See you next time on Farm Connections.
Farm Connections on KSMQ, sponsored in part by the Cedars of Austin, a senior living community. We even have a retired farmers club. Independent, assisted, and memory care apartments. Learn more at cedarsofaustin.com. Will Mahler, the ag attorney, has been representing dairy farms in Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin for 37 years. Will Mahler, the ag attorney's office is in Rochester, and Will is a proud partner of Farm Connections. Thanks, Will Mahler.